Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
I don't share this often other than maybe a Reader's Digest version, but I was not raised in church. So oftentimes when pastors share their testimony or they share their story, it always starts with, I grew up in church, but I didn't really make a faith commitment until I was in high school or college. I was that kid who had zero church experience.
Stuck in addiction, lost in despair, lonely, isolated, and then Jesus. Welcome to Brought Back to Life, a podcast where we explore how Jesus changes everything.
My name is Brandon Beals. I am the lead pastor of Venture Church in Mill Creek. When I think about what my life mission statement is, I just want to make Jesus look good. I just want to make Jesus famous. One of the lines that we share often at Venture, and if you've ever talked to anyone that has been a part of our church, this is just part of our vernacular. And we always talk about that there's that moment in every one of our lives where Jesus crosses our path. And when Jesus crosses our path, he changes everything. And the thing that I have loved about leading Venture Church is I look at this large church that God blessed my wife and I with the opportunity to start 20 years ago, and we see where it is today. And we look at all these different people from all these different walks of life, and they really have, for all intents and purposes, nothing in common, but they have that most important thing in common. At just the right moment, Jesus crossed their path. And when he did, turned their life upside down and changed everything. I don't share this often other than maybe a Reader's Digest version, but I was not raised in church. So oftentimes when pastors share their testimony or they share their story, it always starts with, I grew up in church, but I didn't really make a faith commitment until I was in high school or college. I was that kid who had zero church experience. My parents didn't go to church. My grandparents didn't go to church. My dad grew up an Italian in Boston. He joined the military at 17, ended up in the Vietnam War. After the war, he was stationed in a missile base in Great Falls, Montana, and he met my mom at a dance that the base was hosting. My mom was born and raised in Montana, multi-generation, farmer, rancher, Montana, zero church experience, either one of them. Well, they met, fell in love, had me. After the Vietnam War, my dad graduates goes to college, uses his GI Bill, and ends up with his degree, couldn't find a job in Montana, finds a job in Seattle, Washington. So when I was in first grade, my parents moved to Seattle, away from all of my family, my mom's side, and again, my dad's side lived in Boston. Zero church experience. We just kind of live life. I was reflecting on this a while ago at church, and I was sharing this story with our church, and I always tell everybody it was kind of like a repressed memory. Repressed memory is sometimes when you have childhood trauma, your mind shoves things away and doesn't allow you to remember it because it doesn't want you to experience the trauma. But then there's a trigger that brings it back. And I remembered going to church one time. And I shared it in front of our church. Now, whenever I share a story in front of the church, usually my mom calls me on my way home to tell me how the story I shared was wrong. So I shared this story, and here's the story. This is the one time I remember going to church. It must have been a Catholic church, and I know this now. Like as an adult man, minister, I know that it was a Catholic church. But what I remembered about the service is I only remembered my mom being there and me being there. I don't know where my sister was. I don't know if my dad was there or not. But in my memory, I didn't remember them being there. And my mom, to bribe me to go, gave me a pack of Hubba Bubba gum. So back in the 80s, you ate this gum, you chewed it, it turned your mouth blue. And I was 10, so I ate all 5. And I remember sitting in this this service, listening to this guy speak. And at various moments, people would stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. And because I'd never been before, and everybody else I looked around seemed to know what they were doing. And so they would stand up and I would stand up late. Then they would sit down and I'd be the last one sitting down. That was kind of the way the whole thing went. And then there was this point that the speaker guy, and it was the priest now, and I know what he was doing now. He was serving communion. He had everyone line up in front of him and they would come forward and he would serve them communion. And my mom made us stand in the line, and I noticed that he was either placing the cracker, the bread, in someone's mouth, or they would make a cup with their hands and he would place it in their hands. Now, as we got closer, I am trying to assess, is he going to stick it in my mouth or is he going to make me do a cup? Because I have a problem. I have a wad of gum in my mouth and I don't know what to do with my gum. If he's going to make me put it in a cup, no problem. I will keep the gum in my mouth. But if he's going to shove it in my mouth, I need to put the gum in my hand because it was too much gum to swallow. And back then, we were told that if you swallow gum, it takes 7 years to digest. So that is like the warning your parents would always tell you. So by the time I got to the front, I had thought he's having all the younger people make a cup. So I decided to grab the wad of gum and shove it in my hand. And I walked forward, opened my mouth, and he said something to the effect of, "Show me the sacred cup." So my first and only time ever going to church, I have a wad of gum in my hand that I then show to the person giving me the communion. He looks at me with disdain, puts the cracker next to my wad of gum, turns around and walk away. So I shared this with our church. My mom, like I expected, called me 5 minutes after church. And I expected that I made this whole story up in my head. And my mom's voice breaks up. Like she is starting to cry. And she said, "Brandon, I can't believe you remember that moment." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she goes, "That was the worst experience I've ever had in my life." She said, "I was just beginning to explore faith and I decided to go to church and I couldn't get your father to go. So I made you go. And we sat there, and when people were coming forward to communion, I just was excited about this exploration of faith, so I went forward." And he said, and then she said, "And then this whole thing happened to you." And then she says, "What you don't remember is that afterwards, when the priest looked at me, he yelled at me in front of everyone and said, 'Only members of our church can receive communion.'" She said, "So I grabbed you and we ran out of that service and I cried the whole way home." So that was the only experience that I had ever had going to church. So it was a repressed memory that is, to this day, my mom's most traumatic experience. And I before I shared it today, I asked permission from her to share it. Fast forward, I'm now starting high school, going to Meadowdale High School. I had just finished 2-a-days with football, and I was hanging out with a bunch of my buddies at a park. And while I was there, I met a girl, and she was cute. And I always joked that cute girls can get boys to do anything. So I asked for her number. She gave me her number and started calling her. And after a while, I said, "Hey, girl, let's go out." And she said this. She said, "I only go with boys that go to my youth group." And I was like, "Youth group? What's that?" She goes, "It's a thing that happens at my church for teenagers on Wednesday night." And I'm like, "I'm game." And she went to a youth group in Seattle. So I started showing up at these youth services. I went 4 times. Then I called her again. I said, "Say, girl, what's up? Been going to your youth services." And she said this. She said, "Yeah, I talked to my mom, and my mom said I'm only allowed to go out with boys that go to my Christian school." And I thought, I was in the middle of football, had just started my freshman year of high school, but this girl was really cute. I don't know what caused me to do this. More than anything, I don't know what allowed my dad to say yes. But I went home to my very successful businessman father, and I said, "Dad, I want to go to the Christian school at that church in Seattle." I think there's a lot of circumstances that led to this, but I don't really know why my parents said yes in that moment. But we were moving from Linwood to Mill Creek. And so I was going to have to switch schools. I don't know if I knew about it at the time, but my parents knew we were moving. So I would have had to switch from Meadowdale to Bothell. And for whatever reason, my parents let me go to the school. And so I start going to a Christian school. Remember, I talk about at just the right moment, Jesus crosses your path and everything changes. So I start going to this school. This school was a small Christian school in Seattle. And everybody in the school had been raised in the church, and they were pastors' kids, deacons' kids, leaders in the church's kids, and me. And I was the evil public school kid that started going to the school. I don't think they knew anything about the public school kids other than what they'd seen in the movie Outsiders or maybe The Breakfast Club. So I was that, and I was bad. Like when I first started going to the school, I was the one that their parents warned them about. Like, you can't hang out with them. Girls told me to stay away. But there was this aura of mystery about me because I was a public school kid. So kind of immediately everybody's afraid of me, and I thought it was super tough. Whenever I tell this story, everybody always asks me, so Brandon, did you end up dating the girl? Believe it or not, never, ever dated the girl. She ended up becoming a really good friend of mine, but I can't exactly tell you when. I just knew that I sensed that something was different there. And there came a point, my sophomore year of high school, where Jesus really changed my life. And he changed everything. Up to that point in my life revolved around sports and girls. And then Jesus crossed my path and changed everything. And it was Easter Sunday, my sophomore year of high school, was the day I got baptized. I wish I could remember the exact moment when I prayed a prayer, responded to an altar call. But I tell people often at Venture that sometimes salvation for people is a process. Sometimes it's not an event. And I share that because that was my experience. I don't know exactly when it happened. I just know that a transformation happened over time, that I went from being the kid that taught all the Christian school kids curse words that they were afraid of to somebody that was the first one worshiping, the first one responding to a message. And I remember what it was like to first go to church. So I always tell everybody that one of mine and my wife Di's gift to the kingdom of God is we understand what it was like to not go to church and to start going to church and assimilate into this weird subculture that everyone else that's there seems to fully understand, but they speak a foreign language, things look different, everything. I always joke that church in the 80s was the only place that you could go that had burgundy carpet and brass railings, other than a Broadway theater, and we didn't make enough money to go to things like that. And it was really hard to assimilate into that culture. And I remember the church that I got saved in was a wild, crazy, charismatic church. I had really no other church experience except for this huge church where the guy would preach, services were 3 hours long, people were dancing in the aisles. Like, you talk about the cartwheel, yelling, screaming services. That's what I thought every church was like, because that was the church I got saved in. When I first started really going to church, my greatest fear was during the singing time, there would come a point, I used to call it when the Jewish music part would happen, because I didn't know what it was. So I called it the Jewish music part. And they would start dancing in the aisles. And my greatest fear was that the little old ladies that would do the dance circles would grab me and make me dance with them. And I was afraid of it because I didn't know the dance moves. And that was my greatest fear going to church. I sensed by my junior year of high school that maybe the course of my life was going to change. That up to this point, the plan was Brandon's going to go to the University of Washington, be a businessman like his dad, maybe an attorney, things like that. And I remember I was sitting in a revival service. Place was packed. And we had a special speaker, and I was just kind of sitting in the middle. And at this point, I don't really understand things, and I don't know terminology, and I couldn't really explain it. And one of the cool things about having no church experience and getting saved from the world is I always joke that because I wasn't raised in church, I hadn't been trained to doubt stuff. Because I'd just had my life radically turned upside down. I just believed everything the Bible said. So the Bible said it healed. I believe that God could heal people. If the Bible says that God can give prophetic words, I believed these types of things. So I just believed all this stuff. If I would have actually read that Jesus walked on water, I'd have probably tried to walk on water. I just believed everything. I didn't have a hint of doubt. And I remember sitting in that service kind of in the middle, and I had a conversation with Jesus in my head. And it went something like this. And you talk to God in your head. And I said, hey, Jesus, I think I might be supposed to be doing what that guy's doing on the stage. If I'm supposed to be doing what he's doing, have him stop and tell me. So remember, this is a guest speaker. He's preaching in front of a packed crowd. Like, understanding the context of this now, it's kind of a ridiculous prayer to pray, that the chances of a guest speaker who's got a canned sermon stopping in the middle of his sermon and, doing something like that, it doesn't happen. Well, that particular day it did. He stopped mid-sentence, points at me, describes what I'm wearing, and he said a phrase that I wrote down. It's the only reason I remember it, because I didn't know what he was talking about. He said, God has ordained you to preach the gospel. And then just as quickly as he said it to me, he went back into his sermon. And that was the first time I thought, this Jesus thing is really cool. And that was the first time I thought, he's changing everything. Like I said, when Jesus crosses your path, he changes everything. A year beforehand, I made a faith commitment. I don't even remember when it happened. A year later, I'm now feeling like I might be heading into full-time ministry, and I didn't even know what those terms were. It was my senior year of high school. I'm hanging out with my youth pastor. He's meeting with all the seniors because he's asking them what they want to do with their life. And I remember I was meeting with him, and he said, what do you want to do with your life, Brandon? And I said, well, I think I'm going to go to the University of Washington. I just got accepted. And he said, well, what do you want to be? Are you going to do business like your dad? And I said, I think I'm supposed to be doing what you do. And he said, why don't you go to Bible college? I was like, I don't even know what Bible college is. He goes, what's Bible college? And he goes, well, it's where people go to get trained into ministry. And I said, well, how do you do that? And he slid a brochure for Northwest Bible College in front of me, which is now Northwest University. And he said, you should go there. And this is honestly how the story goes. So I was super excited. I thought, I'm going to go to Bible college. I'm going to go be a minister. So I went home and told my parents. My mom was for it, but my dad, faith was still a journey for him. And my dad hated the idea, but he didn't want to discourage me. So he said, you should have something to fall back on. So you should go to business school, go to UW, get your business degree, then go do the ministry thing afterwards, because you have to have something to fall back on. And really, it boiled down to, if I went to UW, they were going to pay for my school. But if I really was adamant about going to Bible college, I had to do this on my own. Well, I wanted to go to Bible college. So I went to Bible college, and I was the off-campus kid. So everybody lived on campus, but I couldn't afford to live on campus. So I worked full-time and went to school. And that was all I had time to do. Worked full-time, went to school. Fortunately, that first year of school, I met a cute girl in Psychology 101 who asked me to study with her, who I fell in love with, eventually became my wife. Di and I have been married now for 33 years. And we met that day in Psych 101. But by the time I was a sophomore in high school, Di grew up Lutheran, and her faith had kind of gotten reignited in college. And she started leading the youth ministry at her Lutheran Brethren church. Now, that church had 40 people in it. And again, mine had a couple thousand people in it. So I'd never been to a small church. So our first step ever in ministry, she was the youth director and I was her assistant. So I always look back at the days. Our first youth service, we had 3 kids. This is an honest to goodness true story. 3 kids. Her brother Mike, his best friend Tyson, and the girl that lived across the street, Nicole. Those are the 3 kids that we started with. The only thing that Di and I knew how to do is we were 19. We knew how to have fun. We knew how to love people. And we knew how to help people that had never been to church before get used to this weird church subculture. And we were just us. Believe it or not, those 3 kids started bringing their friends. Next thing you know, it's 40 kids coming. We have a friend that's going to the school, and his name is AJ. We brought AJ in to guest speak for us. And, we didn't have music, anything. We'd never even really preached or anything. We just kind of played games, and I would talk a little bit. I didn't know anything about the Bible, so I tell everybody that I learned in Bible college who Abraham was. I heard the story David and Goliath my sophomore year of college, the first time ever. And I thought they got it from the story of Rocky, because I knew the Rocky Balboa movies more than I knew the Bible. So the Bible was really new to me. But I remember when AJ spoke, he asked everybody at the end to bow their heads, close their eyes. And he did the same altar call that to this day at Venture I do. Had everybody count to 3, raise their hand if they wanted to give their life to Jesus. And I remember all the kids in our youth group raised their hand. So in one day, we had 40 kids that committed their life to Christ. And so that was like my first altar call prayer. I learned it. I just copied what AJ did. Over the next 6 months, that youth ministry grew from 40 students to 80 students. True story. We're these punk 19, 20-year-olds, don't even know what we're doing. I am like barely saved. And we have the largest Lutheran Brethren youth ministry in America. They wrote about us in their national newspaper, and we didn't really know what we were doing. Anyways, that eventually leads to my first full-time ministry job when I started working at Bethany in Everett. I want to fast forward because I think this is just a really fun thing. Nicole, Mike, and Tyson, met them when I was 19. I'm 53 years old. Did you know that all 3 of them are a part of Venture Church? It started when we were 19. First 3 youth kids that Di and I ever had are a part of our church. All 3 of them helped Di and I 20 years ago launch Venture Church. That's really the story of how I got saved. It's the story of my faith. I went from this person who knew absolutely nothing. I had been a minister, I would say, for 10 years before I memorized the books of the Bible in order. Didn't know them. Always had to go to my concordance and look up what page Ecclesiastes was. I had been a full-time minister, full-time youth pastor at a traditional AG church in Everett for 7 years when I discovered that John the Baptist and John the Beloved were 2 different people. I didn't know one day I was like, Di, how is this person writing this, but he was beheaded here? And she's like, Brandon, they're 2 different people. So I tell people that are listening to this, if you're that person and you are raw, 0 faith experience, and you look at this really thick book and you hear these stories that people tell, and it's like everybody understands these songs and understands these stories and is able to quote scripture, and the pastor tells a story about whatever it is, Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, and they're just shaking their heads and you don't have a clue. I just want you to know that this preacher was you. And studying the Bible has been one of the greatest journeys of my entire life. I do always want to qualify everything by saying I do have a doctorate now. I am also a professor at Northwest University, so I do have a general understanding of the Bible now. So don't be afraid for people that go to Venture. But I was that kid whose life was heading in a completely different direction. I was trying to think back if I even knew a Christian as a kid. I can't remember the first time I ever met a Christian. I think that girl was the first Christian that I ever met. And I was 14, 15 years old. And I always think if it wasn't for that day at that park, meeting that girl, I wonder what would have happened. And I just always think Jesus kind of had my number. Like he had a plan. I tell our church all the time that he is the hound of heaven. He is chasing after you. He's just waiting. He's calling to you. He's going to find you. And at just the right moment, he's going to cross your path. And when he does, he will change everything. I do wish I would have gotten a degree from the University of Washington because I do bleed husky purple. But from the moment I started in ministry, I haven't needed a job to fall back on. I've been doing this my whole life. And all I want to do is spend the rest of my life making Jesus famous.
Do you want to share your Jesus story or know someone who should? Let us know at comments@purposely.com. If you loved Brought Back to Life, support us with a 5-star rating and review.